Hello, and welcome to GoLean6Sigma.com's webinar. I'm Elizabeth Swan from GoLean6Sigma.com, and I will be your moderator today. Our presenter today is Ken Maynard. Hi, Ken.
Hey, Elizabeth, how you doing today?
I'm good. Ken is a senior consultant at GoLean6Sigma.com with over 30 years of experience driving profitability and improved quality within organizations across dozens of industries. Ken is a longtime trainer and coach, having trained over 1,200 black belts, master black belts, led over 25 large organization-wide transformation projects, and coached over 1,000 projects. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get rolling, everybody. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. However, you can ask questions anytime by entering them into the chat area. However, there's also a question area, but we'll be using the chat area throughout the webinar. We welcome your participation. Ken's also going to ask you some questions. He's going to ask you to vote in some polls. If we don't get to all your questions during the webinar, we'll answer and post them in the GoLean6Sigma.com LinkedIn group. So you should definitely join that. These webinars and the slides are available for free for introductory level and exclusive for Go-Getter members for intermediate, advanced, and leadership webinars. So join us for our first activity by sharing where you're from. You guys have registered from all over the world, and we'd love to know where you are right now. So type in the chat section where you're joining us today, and let's see what I can see of you guys. So it looks like we've got Lee in Florida. Welcome to Lee. We've got Toma. And Toma, yes, this webinar will be recorded and you will post it. So if you registered, you'll get the posting of the webinar. Trish in New Hampshire at the Department of Transportation, or DOT. Welcome, Trish. Toma's from Texas. We've got Michelle in Tampa, Kevin from Tampa, Kali from New York City, Boris in Toronto, Andrea is in Italy. Awesome, you are our first international participant. We've got Dan from York, Pennsylvania, Rosa from Raleigh, Ted from Lompoc. Welcome, Ted. That's not Ted, that's Todd. Welcome, Todd. We've got Shenny from Brooklyn. We've got Chico from Colorado. We've got Walt from Ontario, another international. Manoj from Cambridgeshire, UK. Welcome. Caroline in Kerman, California. Derek in South Dakota, and Sam in Pennsylvania. Wow, what an awesome lineup. Thank you guys for sharing where you are from. Time's valuable, so I'm going to hand the reins over to Ken. And Ken, why don't you tell them a little bit more about you?
Oh, sure thing. And thanks, Elizabeth. And welcome, everybody. It's great to see all of you here and a variety of locations you're joining us from. It's fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do today. But first, I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. As Elizabeth said, 30 plus years of doing this work. I love the project work. My specialty, I come out of the aerospace defense contracting world as an R&D engineer, but got involved in a version of Lean Six Sigma early on inside of Pratt Whitney Aircraft, later United Technologies. Since then, since 1990, I've been a consultant in the industry. Worked almost exclusively in healthcare through the 90s, from 90 to 1999, and primarily in public hospitals. So a lot of city-run and state-run healthcare institutions. So we'll share some lessons learned from there. But a lot of what we'll talk about today comes from some of the larger engagements I was involved in from the late 90s through the late 2010s at places like Dow Chemical, GE Capital, at Caterpillar, General Motors, Coca-Cola. So we'll talk a bit about those as we get into the methodology. So looking forward to sharing what we do here at the Lean Six Sigma with you and what we've learned with our clients over the years as we go through this process. Specifically today, our conversation is going to be focused on these objectives. By the time we're finished our session today, you'll be able to talk about the unique challenges that you have to deal with when driving continuous improvement in the public sector, how to use Lean Six Sigma projects to drive value in this environment, and something we like to refer to affectionately as the money machine, but think of it as a systematic way to create sustainable value with the Lean Six Sigma projects. So we'll lay out a mechanism to make that happen. And we won't leave here today without spending some time to talk about how you can get started in making that happen. The flow of our conversation, and as Elizabeth mentioned, I've got questions for you. I want to hear from you and kind of help us understand how to target this discussion to meet your needs. So don't be shy and respond to some of the questions and polls that we'll have when we go through. But we'll talk about the challenge you face in the public sector, particularly in government and education, kind of the current dynamics you have to deal with, and then our solution, our approach that addresses those challenges and help you build that sustainable flow of values. We won't leave here again without talking about how to get started and some time at the end of the day for questions and answers. So let's get right to it. So the first thing, not totally unlike any sector in the private sector, to be competitive, it's all about continuing to accelerate the rate of improvement. But in the public sector, particularly in the federal and local government, there's a great deal of pressure in the environment where you've got decreasing revenues from per citizen, while at the same time increasing demands in terms of population increase and demands and expectations from those citizens that you're dealing with. What that drives us to is this performance gap where we're faced with not able to meet the needs in the way that we'd like to, and so we're faced with some unsavory options. You know, we can start to decrease the services that we provide or the quality of the services. God forbid we'd start asking for additional taxes. And on top of that, if you're in the public sector, you're there because you want to make a difference. Most of us got involved in public service to try to have a value-added impact. So it's a very mission-driven environment, but it's faced with these type of challenges. So first question I have for you folks that kind of help us kind of target our discussion: what have you done or what will you do in your organization when you're faced with this performance gap, increasing challenge to provide more and more services or higher quality services while at the same time decreasing revenue? If you wouldn't mind just typing that in the chat window, we'll kind of look at some of your responses and kind of help us go from there.
And what have you seen, Ken? What do you see most happening with the gap?
Yeah, what I see a lot of times is people just trying to make do, and sometimes it's overtime if they can do it. They'll look at cutting some of the resources on the procurement supply side to make it happen. But a lot of times it's I call it HD&G. It's head down and go as fast as I can, trying to keep up until something doesn't quite work. That something begins to break. So not a good option, if you will. And so eventually, yeah.
Go ahead.
Eventually, we've got to turn to finding out ways to do continuous improvement.
That's a new one for me. HD&G, head down and go, Ken.
Head down and go, yeah, HD&G.
Learn something new every day.
Yeah.
We've got a few things flowing in here. We've got, let's see, answering your questions. Manoj says, streamline the process to better efficiency, reduce non-value add process, this is the right webinar.
Yeah, this is us. Yeah.
Dan says focus more on customer service and identify the non-value add tasks and eliminate them.
Yeah, exactly.
Walter says have to change the culture of the senior teams to understand that the gap impacts the ratepayers. Any savings is a benefit to all. I think
nice. Yeah.
And then Kevin says, as a consultant, I rely on agency management to make this determination. I look to highlight opportunities for the agency.
Okay.
And then
interesting. Yeah.
Ig says, ask their sales and marketing, what's the reason for declining revs and the growing demand for services? So looking for the root.
Yeah, to try to understand the dynamics in the marketplace or in the environment.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, so I heard a lot about where we're going with our conversation. We're kind of focusing our efforts on the value or the value added versus the non-value added aspect of what we do. But I also think we can add to that this whole concept of how do we align the organization and that mission-driven culture that we have to make sure we've got a culture that continues to pursue that value. Yeah, good comments. Thanks. Elizabeth, were you going to say something?
I just was going to say to the participants, you guys have an option when you type something in chat. You'll notice your drop down says either all panelists or all panelists and attendees. So if you want just me, Ken, and our support team to see your comments and questions, you can stick to all panelists. But if you'd like to open it up to everybody on the webinar, you can choose the second option, all panelists and attendees.
Okay, great. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Sure.
So continuing on with that discussion about the need to kind of focus the culture on continuous improvement. I mean, that's what options do we have really? But we know that compared to the private sector, there's some unique challenges that you face in the public sector. Here's some of the top ones we hear from our colleagues that work in government and in education, as well as what we see in our clients as well. I got a poll for you. This is kind of the first one. I'm curious to hear what you see as the biggest challenges or barriers to drive continuous improvement, particularly to accelerate continuous improvement. So A, B, C, D, or E. Tell us what you see as the biggest one in your organization.
Okay, so I just launched that. So let's see what they've got coming in. What do you see, Ken? What's the biggest challenge you see? What are you gonna?
I see. Usually that risk averse is one of the top ones. It's one of those if we get aggressive, try to make improvement, and something doesn't go perfect, or we miss a little something here that ends up on the evening news and in the newspaper. Second one is the second one on the list. It's a bit more complex in terms of the way we're organized, the way the federal government and local governments are organized. So a lot more stakeholders to address. So complexity is key. Yeah.
Well, let's see what these guys did. So I'm going to end that and launch it, share results. Okay, so it looks like you've got the biggest is E. Less focus on outcomes and more focus on inputs like budget or cost.
Yeah. Interesting.
25% many stakeholders to consider.
Yeah.
And then you've got 19% risk averse. If something goes wrong, then it's in the news. Yeah, which is the reality for the public sector. And the last, or then there's 14% is time and 5% delayed feedback from the marker customer, except for one complaints. Okay.
Excellent. Well, we'll talk more about that as we get into the details of this around the budget and that focus on the inputs like the budget. That's a fact of life too, right? We live from year to year based on that annual budget and what we have to use to provide our services. So all those are challenges to kind of help us drive continuous improvement and drive value. So let's talk about kind of switch gears just a little bit and say if we could address those challenges and we could actually get into a continuous improvement situation where, let me get my display here. Sorry about that, folks. So let's switch perspectives just a little bit. Now let's say, what if you could achieve more with less? What if we could overcome those barriers that we just talked about and accelerating continuous improvement, and we're able to drive change where you did see your team or your organization improving at 25 to 50% at an annual rate, where you saw improvements with the productivity improvement, faster service, with everybody in each department in the organization knowing what it costs to provide their services in the organization. What would you do if you were realizing this value? If you could actually see 18 people doing the work of 25 much easier than they were able to do it before, and you see that you're creating that value, as some of you mentioned, reducing the non-value added. What would you do with the additional value that you realized? What would you do with that? Where would that go in the business?
You've got Manoj chiming in, build accountability and responsibility within the teams.
Okay, very good. Yeah, excellent.
What have you seen? Oh, we've got another one. Dan, redeploy to another area that needs to be improved.
There we go. That's right. I could take those resources and move them into another area. That's what I see. Elizabeth started to ask, what do I see? I see that. I see reinvesting back in the organization to drive improvement further, either in the same place or elsewhere. You know, you're creating value and you're positioning it that we're continuing to pursue our mission and create value to the citizens. So we're reinvesting that, using resources to improve quality and/or process improvement. We sometimes refer to that as the bootstrap approach, right? We make a little bit of improvement. Now we can use those resources to help do even more improvement. And over time, we're pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps. It can be a fragile process to start with. So this means we need to have the vision and the perseverance to kind of keep pulling up by those bootstraps. The good news is in the public sector, it's very mission driven. So you've got a lot of passion to draw on that you can kind of channel into this work. So great responses.
Yeah, thanks, Khalil.
Yeah. All right, let's talk a little bit more about what we would propose as a solution. You know, obviously, being a Lean Six Sigma nerd myself, and it sounds like I've got some of you out there in the audience as well. We see Lean Six Sigma projects as a way to create that value. Not only getting rid of, as we talked about in operations, dealing with non-value added activities, but actually show that we're delivering value year over year back to the citizenry that we serve in our communities. So we're fond of saying at Go Lean Six Sigma, our commitment, our mission is to help individuals and organizations develop their problem-solving muscles. Collectively as an organization, we're talking about developing improvement capabilities. So what we're going to highlight here in just a little bit is how to marshal that training and that improvement capability into a systematic, dynamic process to adapt and pursue your mission. So it's a way to kind of channel that training in those projects to get the results you're looking for. And we're really talking about that creating a sustainable, continuous value creation machine, or money machine, we like to refer to it. So let's talk a little bit about value first before we go any further. I think I'm talking to people that understand this concept, and particularly in the public sector. This is a relatively new thought over the last 10 years or so, where we start to realize that while we've got a preponderance of financial systems that are very technical and adept at capturing all the costs associated with providing the services in the public sector, we don't have that equal amount of technology, if you will, or thought on value creation. So there's really been a push to start to recognize in the public sector how we provide value, and that we can systematically track that. So Mark Moore, a Harvard professor, a business school professor, is one of the leading authors and thought thinkers in this area, and he proposes that we come up with a way to attract value that we create in the organization. Think about this as a way, as some of you mentioned, to focus the culture not only in pursuit of the mission, but pursuit of continual improvement in that mission and the value that we create. The good news is in Lean Six Sigma, there's been work that's been done in the private sector that we can leverage in the public sector around this very concept, this concept of value, or it's a quality throughput divided by the operational expense. I won't give you an example of this, but this is actually a metric that comes from theory of constraints. Think of it as a way to track across the organization the contribution of various improvement efforts to the overall value creation goals of the organization. The formula is basically quality is the number of outputs that we're producing in a given department or service line. Throughput is the transactions that are produced. So I got good stuff versus the total amount of stuff being produced. And then the OE is basically just the total cost associated with providing that service. So a little bit of accounting needs to go into this, but it's not terribly complex. We'll walk through an example in just a little bit. But think of this as a metric to help us track our performance. As I mentioned here, it comes from Theory of Constraints of Dr. Ellie Goldratt. Very big at the time in the private sector, where organizations were focusing a lot on, to their detriment, on cost reduction. And so, well, wait a minute, cost is part of the formula, but we've got to be looking at the quality of what we do too. So it's an effectiveness and efficiency measure. In the government sector, one of the leading areas, as this Mr. McHugh from Texas Workforce Commission over the last decade or so as a leader of business transformation and rapid improvement inside of that agency has shown how this and the rapid improvement methods have been able to align their organization to drive improvement across all the departments. Every department uses this metric to kind of track progress, set goals, and to prioritize their efforts. So a way to reframe continuous improvement, you'll measure improvement on a project by project basis, but if you want to look at it collectively, this is one of the indicators we can use to communicate to our customers, or to our citizenry, the community, if you will, the value that we're creating. Let's look at a simple example. I can't, as a Lean Six Sigma nerd, I've got to throw a few formulas in and talk just a little about it. So here's a simple example of what this metric looks like. I've been asked to make pizzas for the football game over the weekend. Thank God football's back, and I'm going to make pizzas for the party. We're going to get together socially, distance, and just the right number of people, so within guidelines. But I'm going to make 10 pizzas. That's my plan. I'll keep the math simple. I want to make 10 pizzas. It's going to cost me $100 to make those pizzas. I got my grocery list. I'm ready to go. Lo and behold, I start cooking those pizzas early Saturday morning. However, I don't get 10 pizzas. I end up with 7 good pizzas. 3 of them didn't turn out so good. The ingredients weren't quite right. I didn't get the dough quite right when I made it. So bottom line, I didn't get all the pizzas that I planned to get out in the process. Instead of the 10, I got 7. Well, what does that mean from the quality metric? Well, that means from throughput, the number of pizzas I tried to make, 10, but I only had 7 good pizzas, so 70% yield, or 70% good, 30% bad. If I do that Q times T, I get a 7 in that top of that ratio in the numerator. And then for the operating expenses, $100. So I end up with a 0.07 for that indicator. Or if I want to take the inverse of that and express it in terms of financial terms, it's cost per pizza, cost per unit. That's $14 and change for the cost of the pizza. So that's how the metric works. Being a Lean Six Sigma nerd, and even though I've only got 7 of those pizzas out, my friends love the pizzas. So now they've asked me to do it again. I'm going to track this. And I'm going to see if we'll make progress. And so the way this metric works, and the way you can show value, is not just cost cutting or moving staff around. It's around, improving throughput. If I get 8 good pizzas out instead of 10, my value goes up. That's a no-brainer. However, what if I keep my quality the same, but I get the throughput up? I still got 70% good, 30% bad, but I get 12 pizzas done at the same price and in the same time. Well, my value goes up. Or if I get I get 10 pizzas out at the same quality level, 70%, but now I do it for $90 instead of $100, my value goes up. So I've got several levers I can move with my improvement efforts to drive value in the system. Is that making sense? Just real quick, the value creation, throughput divided by the resources needed to produce it. Any questions on that before we go on?
Looks like they're getting it.
All right, let's roll. All right, so that's value creation. That's thinking about a metric, because that's one of the challenges we have when we're doing improvement in an organization, not just in the public sector, in the private sector. We count each project independently, and it may reduce cycle time, may reduce costs, may generate revenue, may get rid of defects. But how do we translate that to a quantifiable and financial metric? And a lot of times it breaks down to just cost in the private sector. In this public sector, we would submit we need to focus on the value that's being created. And so let's talk about, with that change in perspective and looking for value, how we can use these Lean Six Sigma projects to drive that creation of value. So if you think about Lean Six Sigma projects, at least we do, we consider those as strategic assets. I mentioned before, I've been involved in some large global deployments at Dow, at General Electric, at Caterpillar, at GM, at Coca-Cola. Those organizations, when they embarked on those, particularly the global deployments they did rapidly, they weren't just doing projects for improvement's sake. They were doing projects to drive financial metrics, primarily revenue and cost savings in the business. So a very rigorous efforts were put in place to identify projects that they could reasonably forecast a financial impact once that project was implemented. So a lot of rigor. We're going to share some of that with you today on how to make that happen in the context of value creation. So think of a Lean Six Sigma project following DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. We consider those as a strategic strategic asset or a value capsule, maybe even more tangible than other parts of the organization. It's the generally accepted accounting practices recognize, for example, in the private sector, accounts receivable as an asset. You could even borrow money from the bank based on your accounts receivable. We would submit that Lean Six Sigma projects are probably more tangible than those accounts receivable, because accounts receivable, to realize that benefit, you have to get paid, and you don't have complete payment control over that payment. You know, the time at which it takes that debtor to pay and how much they pay is not completely in your control. However, these Lean Six Sigma projects are within your control to kind of drive and implement those. We submit that they're even more tangible than your accounts receivable, even though at this time, generally accepted accounting practices don't recognize that. But think about this as a project that can help you drive results. Over time, we're talking about a pipeline of these projects. You accumulate the projects that deliver results. You're talking about accumulated results of value to the business, to the organization over time. What that really looks like to you then is creating this pipeline of projects that we can work, that we can execute in a timely manner that drive to that results that we're looking for. To do this, there's three things we need to keep in mind that are necessary conditions for creating this predictable, ongoing value creation. And these are the three things. We're going to highlight these in more detail as we go through our discussion, but I'd like to get your feedback right now. If you think about in your organization, which of these would be the most challenging? Creating a steady stream of projects, the reliable assessment of their impact, or the timely completion of those projects? Which one do you think would be the most challenging for your organization to do continuously over time?
And what's your experience, Ken? What do you expect to see the most of here?
I expect that B being one of the biggest challenges. We have trouble with that. It's not easy to do, and there's a lot of stakeholders involved in that. So that reliable assessment of impact, both performance and financial, is key. We're going to spend some time on that, getting that done. Second, maybe the timely completion.
Okay. Well, let me give it 2 more seconds here. There's a few more folks chiming in. Okay. So then I'm going to launch and share. And yeah, so number 2, almost 60%. And the second is the timely completion, and only 4% struggling with a steady stream of projects.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. You know, and that makes sense. That's what we're seeing. We hear from our colleagues. We see in our clients is we usually don't have a lot of challenge coming up with project. Now we'll talk a little bit more about how to vet those projects as we go through this. And part of that vetting is item B, a reliable assessment. That's the most challenging one. So we'll spend quite a bit of time kind of walking through some strategies or tactics for that. And then timely completion of projects. You know, if you've vetted it well and it's got a meaningful assessment, then that usually helps drive the completion of it. So good feedback. Thanks for sharing that, folks. Well, we'll talk a little bit about each one of these. The rest of this conversation that we'll have is kind of digging a little deeper in each of these 3 elements on how to drive this ongoing value creation. So let's talk about meaningful projects to begin with. And as it sounds like most organizations, that's not a challenge. We're tripping over improvement opportunities out there, right? And so the bigger challenge is, which ones do we do first? Let's prioritize those just a little bit. So we want problems that, that for this Lean Six Sigma approach, those that are really problems that we don't have a solution for and or we don't know the cause for. They really lend themselves to that DMAIC project. That's not to say there's some value in some other projects that are more like quick wins. It's just that they don't lend themselves to this steady stream of production that we're talking about. Solve them another way, count the improvement, move on. But we're looking for those that really need the rigor of a process improvement project. And again, this is another key factor, and this is where the public sector usually has a leg up on the private sector, really tied to the mission, why we exist, being good stewards of the taxpayers' money, trying to provide vital services. What are things that are going to help us do that better? And so it's got to be aligned to your mission, driving customer satisfaction, quality, and operational excellence. We need to prioritize that list just a little bit so we focus on the right things. The last thing we want to do as we start getting into implementing projects is make sure we're working on the right ones, the ones that are going to give us some benefit, because it's a costly time and resources to kind of get things done if we're not working on the ones that are going to drive that value. And then lastly, and this is a big one, we'll hit this several times, meaningful projects also are projects that the leadership of the organization is willing to sponsor, to champion as they go through this. I think we've had some comments early on as one of the challenges in organizations was tied to leadership engagement. Let me just ask you, what have you found as an effective way? This is a question to the group to kind of respond in the chat. What are some of the ways you found to effectively engage leadership to sponsor projects or be engaged in improvement activities? What's worked for you?
And while they think about that, and yeah, guys, feel free to type in to the panelists or everybody, including attendees. And how about you, Ken? What have you seen to be effective in facilitating that incredibly critical leadership sponsorship?
Yeah. Well, you got to have leaders that not only support the effort that the organization's getting ready to undertake, but they actually set direction. So they're involved in helping decide what we're going to work on, and then they're engaged in making sure we make progress in doing that. You'll see some of that as we go through this. So really get ownership on what we work on and making progress on some plan toward working on those projects.
Well, we've got some nice responses. Dan says, metrics to prove the necessity of the project.
Yeah, nice.
So getting some good measures. Manoj offered show value creation on continuous improvement projects. So kind of tied to what Dan is saying in terms of metrics. Michelle said, show the benefits of the project, financial and metric driven arguments. So attach the money.
You got it. The language of leadership, right?
The
Dollar
language.
signs. Yeah.
Kevin said it only seems to work with direct engagement with leadership. So that's a good point there. Going directly to folks. And Lee's agreeing, metrics for sure. And Rosa said, see how it will save money or time and create efficiency. So not just the money, but also the time savings for folks, what they're doing for work. Khalil offers define and explain the project with metrics. So more of that direct, getting in there and explaining what is this about. And Manoj offered time, improve the time, the cost, and the resource. So everyone's looking at those metrics that are going to matter to leadership, but I like that idea of going directly to them. Yeah.
Well, and I heard two key things there. Obviously, we're talking to the converted, so they're right where we're going with this discussion. I'm hearing that the language of value and financial impact dollars, and we've talked about that already with the value creation. You can talk about that in terms of cost per unit, in terms of service we provided, but also direct involvement in the leadership in this creation of this money machine, if you will. So we'll talk a little bit more about that actually in the next slide. This whole selecting meaningful projects, leadership needs to be involved in that directly in making that happen. So we'll go there next. Yeah, thanks for the feedback, folks. So don't let me forget, we'll also talk on a project by project basis, an approach to validating the potential financial impact of a project. But for now, let's talk about the operation of this money machine. You start to see how we get direct engagement of not just leadership, but the organization in coming up with these meaningful projects and making things happen. So you're going to start with the beginning of that pipeline with just raw project ideas. Usually not a limit, hard to come up with a long list of potential improvement ideas. What we'd say here, usually the first question I get is, well, how many projects are we talking about? Well, a good place to start, as this slide suggests, is at least 5 times the number of project leaders or project teams you anticipate in the organization. So let's keep the math simple. Let's say we're going to have 5 project leaders that are going to run the projects to drive improvement in the organization. So if I'm knowing I'm heading in down that path, then I need at least 25 raw ideas to kind of get me started if I want to get to the point where I've got at least one for each one of those project teams that go through the process. So raw ideas. Then I'm going to define these projects. This is usually going from raw ideas to actually crafting them into a problem statement and prioritizing them just a little bit. So now they're actually starting to look like real projects. You're going to get some fallout as you do that. So I may start out with 25 raw ideas. Now I'm going to get down to maybe half of that. I need at least 2 projects now. This is kind of the limit. At least 2 projects, defined projects at this point, as I have project leaders. So back to that 10 project leaders or 5 project leaders, excuse me. I need 10 projects to kind of fall through this hurdle in the process. So I've gone a little bit further, turned them into a problem statement, draft a charter. Now we're going to validate these projects. This is all before anybody works anything. And these is leadership and other resources in the organization doing this work prior to handing this off to a black belt or green belt to run the project. And we'll talk more about this in just a little bit. This is several of you mentioned the need to have financial forecast for a given project. We're going to validate these projects, spend some time trying to understand if we make this improvement, how's it going to impact performance in the business, and how does that performance translate to value or financials. And there we're looking for at least 1 project for every project team that's out there in the pipeline. So if they're working a project, I've got another project waiting for them that's been validated, and leadership and the middle management that are usually involved in this have been engaged to kind of do this groundwork to decide which projects need to be worked on. So you start to see that leadership engagement directly in this work so far. Then I've obviously got active projects that are going to go through the DMAIC process and understand current state, understand root causes, and come up with the best solutions to improve that process and eventually deliver on the value proposition that we forecast. The trick is, we'll talk more about it shortly, we need to get those done quickly as we go, timely completion of projects. So that's kind of the operation of this money machine or value creation machine. Let's talk a little bit about each of those steps. So identifying project ideas, what practice, just again, let me ask, it sounds like well, let me just kind of share with you, because it sounded like that wasn't a challenge for a lot of us, identifying project ideas. If you want to make this more systematic so we can maintain it over time, a couple of suggestions I would add is, again, involve the leadership team. Often for a best practice, and sort of large deployments like at GE Capital, at Caterpillar, at General Motor, we'd have a launch session for the first round of improvement projects that would go into the pipeline. A couple-hour session where we'd bring senior leadership and middle management together, and based on whatever the current strategy gaps were, whatever the current metrics were showing there's a gap in where we are versus where we wanted to be, or known problems that were keeping us up at night, we just created a list of ideas. A raw list of ideas that got shared inside this session. We took those ideas and turned them into, as you see over here on the right-hand side, problems. We're going to prioritize those problems as we look at through those, and draft a charter eventually that we can start to hand off to the folks to do the validation. So this is going from raw ideas to a defined project that are kind of prioritized in that pipeline.
So Ken, what practice have you found effective in terms of identifying projects?
I think having that formal session, as we're outlining here, of senior leaders and middle management coming to this session with a little bit of homework, saying, think about problems that you have in your operations that keep you from being able to get your work done, that are consistent with us trying to accomplish these annual goals. And then you pull those together with this group. While they're doing that, you ask that they also solicit that ideas from their staff. So you want ideas from throughout the organization. Then you want to pull with that group together. You want to work through those ideas, clarify them, prioritize them. And what you're doing is a couple of things. You're not just mechanically getting a list of ideas. You're also getting a kind of a shared understanding and alignment on this leadership team and middle management team on where this is going to go. And they're the ones that are going to have to sponsor this and champion this as it goes forward. So kind of the best of practice approach.
That's great. Thank you.
You bet. Questions on that before we go on, folks?
Manoj has chimed in to try and solve pain points and challenges. Just you're sort of looking for where.
Yeah, that's right.
Where the pain points are.
That's right. If for lack of anything else, you just ask people what keeps them up at night, what gives you pain, what frustrates you every day, what fires are you putting out regularly that just don't seem to go away, keep coming back, and start there. What you're going to find is once you start this process, it kind of helps perpetuate the systematic identification of new projects, new problems to solve. So it just gets started. And usually the first wave is not that difficult. It's just keeping it up as we keep going. So you want to meet regularly. So another best practice would be this formal session once a quarter, twice a year, come together and add more ideas into the pipeline.
Ken, we've got a question from Khalil. How does this process work in a matrixed organization?
Oh, good question. Good question. Well, it just means typically we're going to have, and I see that a lot, not only in the public sector, but in aerospace and defense contracting, very matrix organization, people working with different groups. A couple of things. One, the body of people you bring to the session is larger because you got to represent a lot of different functions. And you may need to spend some time pre-work thinking about the value streams in the business. You know, we're organized a certain way, but work gets done a certain way. And what we're really looking at is how the work gets done. So we can kind of come together and look at the value streams or the programs in the organization and start to prioritize where to focus in terms of which programs, and then what are the problems in those programs.
We've got one last suggestion from Manoj, who keeps a suggestion box, issues to be resolved, that come into the mailbox. And then we've got a question from Walter. How do you get around the people that see a perfect world with no problems? I'm thinking that acknowledging a problem is failure. Sort of resistance to change. You've probably seen that.
Oh, I've seen that a lot. Well, one of the challenges, and this is again, leadership's role is very important. There's got to be a compelling need for change to begin with. So that's kind of the backstory here. We've kind of jumped right into tactics with projects, but really an understanding that whether it's a crisis motivation that we're trying to solve some problems, or a vision we're trying to create for the future, there's a gap on where we are and where we want to be. So really kind of communicating that gap and making it safe to talk about what needs to be done to bridge that gap, and not so much that we've got failure or people aren't doing what they need to do. So really kind of repositioning that value creation discussion we had early on is a key part of that. This is all about how do we continue to add greater value in this environment to our communities. So kind of reframing that mission, if you will. Yeah, good question. Thank you.
Yeah, and one last comment from Dan. Metrics prove the point.
Yeah, metrics prove the point. Yeah, and based on that feedback, I'm going to move a little quickly to talk some about metrics on a project by project basis. So I think we get it on how to identify projects. You may have seen this before. Part of that leadership session, as we move from raw ideas to defined project, this again gets alignment on whether it's a matrix organization or not. You're talking about getting leadership and middle management, which play a key role and often are forgotten in this process, play a key role in kind of agreeing on what the priorities are. It's not very complicated. It's a qualitative assessment at this point, but they're having some discussion around what the potential impact is for a given project and what the difficulty is. And obviously we want to work on the high impact projects. Obviously if we can find the high impact, low difficulty, those are the ones we want to run with, but don't forget that, the high impact, difficult projects may, be very fruitful. And obviously the low difficulty projects may be quick wins. We can kind of get those done quickly. So if you can find some just do it, you jump on those as quickly as you can. But let's talk about the assessment. And kind of keeping you in mind of where we're going with this methodology. This kind of ties to several of the comments about the need to tie the projects and improvement efforts to the dollars and the finance, which really means when we validate these projects to see which ones we're going to work on and what to expect in terms of impact, we really get into the financial forecast of this. So it's really going to require a combination of work from the operations, into people in operations, and the finance community inside the business. As a best practice in the private sector, we'll often set up a group inside the business that are kind of an independent auditors that are going to be our validators of our financial projections. Is that reasonable? If we do this and we get that result, is it reasonable to count it as this kind of finance? So we kind of keep ourselves honest and have some checks and balances. You don't always have to go that rigorous, but you do need to have this conversation. So let's take a simple example and talk about a way to kind of have this conversation. Let's say we want to improve a process. It's one of the services we provide in an organization, but we're experiencing too many errors. It's a headache. Customers complaining, staff's complaining. So we really need to frame that. So what does that mean in terms of the system that's producing that service, providing that service? So what's the issue? Well, because we have so many errors, that means there's delays. That means there's rework. That means the backlog is growing. We can't keep up with demand. Well, to dig a little deeper and try to get to the financial impact on that, we need to think about, so what happens because of this, delays, growing rework, growing backlog? What happens to our ability to provide those services? I'm going to walk you through all those types of questions, but those are the types of questions we need to explore. Depending on the business, it's different for every business, every organization. Some of these may be the areas where you're going to receive some benefit. Oh yeah, based on how this process works for us, we've got we spend premium freight to expedite the service. We pay overtime to get this done, so on and so forth. So you'll want to explore these and then identify on a project by project basis which things are really going to be the areas at which you can gain benefit. When you do that, then that becomes what you baseline and forecast as part of the validated project going forward. We're going to use a tool called a future reality tree, to kind of have this discussion. So think of this as a structured discussion to kind of think about a future state where we've improved this process and what we think the impact of that's going to be and where we might be able to quantify benefits. So let's start with the typical, where it usually starts, and what we're suggesting is we need to go a little deeper to make this happen. Let's say I'm going to reduce the errors in the service. That's kind of where this starts. We haven't done it yet. We're projecting what if we do. Let's say we reduce it by 10%, we reduce it by 15%. What's the consequence of that? Well, immediately that means, for example, staff may be doing less rework. All right, that's great. So what's the result of staff having less rework? Well, they've got more capacity. I can spend more time doing new work versus the same work 2 or 3 times. We call it the scraping the burnt toast syndrome. Instead of spending my time scraping burnt toast, I can make more toast. So now that I've got more capacity, what does that mean for the organization? Well, it may mean, I can do the same amount of work with less staff. Well, not where we really want to go. We're not trying to advocate, unless we can redeploy resources and so forth, just looking at reducing staffing. And it's not always the case that we're having to use overtime to get this work done. If that is, then you may immediately start to realize I can get this work done with less or no overtime in the process. So immediately start to see some benefit there. But I want to go a little bit deeper than this. That's kind of typically where we stop, and there's more that we want to dig a little deeper on and go to that value creation that we talked about. So let's go back and start this over. We'll keep that staffing and the overtime opportunity there as potential impact. But if I've increased capacity, that means I can get things done faster. So the time it takes to get this application done, or this approval done, or this licensing done, or these potholes filled, or the snow removed, that's going to drive customer satisfaction. Well, in driving customer satisfaction in the private sector, usually it can mean revenue generation. Well, that's not the market we're in, so that's probably not going to be one of the opportunities for us. I'll leave it there for now, but that's kind of thinking through what happens in this process. Another benefit of improving capacity is maybe I can do more, add some functionality, other features to the service. That would drive customer satisfaction, and again, revenue, but again, not the business that we're in, and not typically one of the options that we're looking at unless there's demand that we're not able to meet. If I work in a world where demand far exceeds my capacity, I improve capacity, then I can sell more, then that's more revenue. But again, that's private, not public sector. What we're really talking about in that public sector is that whole value, that quality throughput equation with the operating expenses. I'm actually able to get more work done with the same amount of resources, or high quality work done with the same amount of resources. So even if it doesn't cut costs somewhere, I can quantify the value creation in that process. So at the very least, if I can't take advantage of overtime, redeploying staff, enhancing the services, I can keep track of that value creation in the process. Even if I go back to look at how much work it takes to get this done versus how much I can get done, and to change that that value calculation, or that cost per unit of work done, as one of the key metrics. Now, obviously, I can quantify, the error rate being reduced, the rework being reduced, the timeliness being improved, but translating that to that financial kind of helps close the deal. So a real quick, think of this as that discussion you'd have with the finance, and then for a given project, we'd go out with our best estimate, say, If we reduce the errors by 10%, just making those numbers up, what does that relate to in terms of capacity? And what does that capacity relate to the potential marginal increase in my ability to get more through the system or get more at less cost? Make sense? I know it's a fly through that real quick, but sounds like that's very key to a lot of you, and you see in your next steps. This is the validation of the project. So obviously the projects that have the greatest impact potential are the ones that are going to start to float to the top of our pipeline for the projects to be worked on. Okay, so we've got through to validated projects. We're ready to hand this off to a project team. Now we want to drive timely completion of these projects. What we can't have is projects linger to get done. The worst thing that can happen is projects start to have birthdays. What we're really talking about is projects that we scope that we can get completed in 2 to 4 months, no more than 6 months. That you're targeting that maximum 4 months. It probably take us 6 by the time we wrangle. So smaller projects may not be the home run we're looking for, but a lot of kind of significant impact, and maybe multiple projects in the same area to get to that home run, to get things done. So keys to ensure that we make that progress. We've already talked about vetting the projects, the financial analysis, the prioritization, the engagement of the leadership. We also need to make sure they get coaching, from somebody that's got the experience, Lean Six Sigma. That's what a lot of our master black belts do. But if you got experience inside the organization, you want to make sure, particularly new project leaders, that they don't go down the kind of the dead ends and areas that they might waste time and resources on in a typical first project. So we want to make sure that you help them through that learning process. As they get more experience, they'll get more effective in getting things done. You want to make sure that when that project's completed, the process owner takes over. That's that middle management or supervision, people that run that project, so that team or that black belt can go back and work the next project out of the pipeline. This also starts to create the culture we're talking about, where we've got that shared responsibility, shared ownership for sustaining the gains and driving continuous improvement. It's not just the project leader's project. And then lastly, but not least, we've talked about the need to have leadership engaged. Once again, leadership was involved very early in identifying these projects and sponsoring them. Now they're going to continue to review progress, the gate reviews we like to have, and remove barriers to these teams being able to get these projects done. So they're involved actively setting direction, reviewing progress, removing barriers to make things happen. So leadership is active and engaged. If they see the value to the financials per some of your comments earlier on, they're going to be active and engaged in these projects. If you're not sure how to make that happen, start in areas where you've got leadership that get it and active and want to get going, and then demonstrate the results, and that'll get more alignment, more engagement from the rest of the organization. Kind of build on this point, the leadership engagement is built into this methodology. That's why it's a kind of a best practice and been successful in large deployments, both in private and public sector. Leadership is engaged actively in these areas from the beginning and identifying projects all the way through to driving completion and continuing to set direction. Lastly, we've talked about kind of making the process work. Now you got to keep the one time through, you got to keep that pipeline flowing. The good news is usually it's not a problem. Where I see the challenge, and you guys hit it, where I see the challenge most of the time is really defining these projects fully and validating them properly so that we're working on the right ones. But once you get going, periodic reviews, leadership sessions to keep raw ideas going into the pipeline. In over 30 years of doing this, I've not seen a project that once we completed one project, we didn't learn a whole host of things we wanted to do next. So it usually generates a lot more ideas, more projects to implement. So you'll harvest those and keep the pipeline full. And you'll want to make sure you go out, suggestion box, idea sessions, engage the employees, and engage the customer, the community, in ideas on how to continue to improve. So that just keeps that pipeline full, and you continue to kind of work the processes through that pipeline. Remember, your milestone that you're looking for is at least one validated project in the pipeline for every project leader that's out there to work a project. So at least that. If you have more, that's even better. If you have more projects and you got leaders, you may ask yourself, do I need more leaders to run these projects? And you'll know the value proposition. You can make informed decisions on how many more resources to add as you move forward. So let's talk a little bit about what this looks like. I want to save you some time at the end here. This is an example of a tool we use with some of our clients that kind of puts a value proposition, the dollars that some of you mentioned, to the potential rollout. So imagine this is kind of getting started with projects. On this left-hand side, I've got some assumptions. I'll kind of give you some of those real quick. Kind of a best practice in organizations that, like at Caterpillar and at Dow Chemical, at GE, the rule of thumb was that 1 to 3% of their organization needed to be full-time project leaders, or other words known as black belts. That's not where you start. You build that capability up. But if you take a modest size organization at say 800 employees, that 1 to 3% is somewhere between 8 to 24 full-time project leaders, full-time black belts. That may be too much to start with. Let's say we want to start with 5 black belts, just to kind of keep the math simple. A good practice out there with 5 black belts can do numerous projects, particularly once they get through their first one. So it's not unreasonable to expect a black belt to do anywhere from 3 to 5 projects a year in a process. So an experienced black belt can do 2 or 3 projects at one time. They're not always in the same place, but you can have those going concurrently. But let's just keep it conservative and say 3 projects per black belt. Well, we're going to vet every one of these projects, but you may work on some projects that you can't get hard dollar savings for. It's the right thing to do. It's a qualitative benefit for the employee or the customer. So we'll do it anyway. So instead of all the projects having a financial impact, most of them do. We'll say 80% of them do. So not 100%, but 80%. This number here is again a conservative number. It's not unusual to see black belt projects being vetted at 200 or 300,000 per project in terms of financial impact. At Caterpillar, it was 300,000. At GE, it was 250 or higher. And so it'll vary by organization. In some organizations, that may be 50,000 per project, but even there, it's real money, it's real impact. We'll use 100,000 here to kind of keep the math simple and conservative as we look at that. So if you look at that, then for five black belts, 100%, 100,000 per project at 80% yield, you're talking about, instead of 1.5 million, you're talking about $1.2 million impact for black belt per year. So if I take those 5 black belts, and they're working those 3 projects a year over the course of 5 years, that's this first graph here, we're talking $6 million. So now we're talking, real value to the organization and the leadership, kind of to the point that was raised before, trying to get the leadership engaged. And here's what you could potentially do in your business. Would this be of value to you? Now, like most businesses, organizations, you start to realize if I can actually get those kind of results, then it becomes a question of, do I have enough project leaders? How many? I can afford not to have more. So let's say instead of just 5, you decide to have 5 every year. Over the course of 5 years, you see how this starts to compound. Over the course of 5 years, instead of $6 million, now we're talking close to $20 million at these assumptions in terms of potential impact. So again, just a kind of way to frame that issue up. A couple of things before we kind of go to questions and answers. I usually get asked, so how do we get started? So this is a lot of how-to. You'll have a copy of these slides and content. You can follow up with us. I think one of the first things you could do in an organization is identify those projects. Spend some time to validate those, work through all the potential areas of impact, get finance involved, make some assumptions on what some conservative estimates of improvement potential are, and come up with that the value proposition. Train your leaders and turn them loose on these projects. Make sure they're supported to get timely completion. So leadership engagement, coaching, and follow-up progress reviews to get things done. If you want to talk more about how to do this and tips on how to make it happen, you can reach out to us. You can contact me directly at that email address. We're glad to share with you some more details on how to make this happen. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Awesome.
Hi there.
Hey there. That was awesome. Thank you. It's incredibly helpful. So everybody, if you've got more questions, please post them, because if we can't answer them in the next minute, because I've got one from Derek I want to get to you.
Okay.
Then Ken, if you show him the next slide, that gives you the link, actually right past questions, is how to join our LinkedIn forum. And I encourage all of you to come in there. Ken posts interesting information in there. We have great conversations. He always asks provocative questions. A lot of our master black belts are in there hosting conversations about what people are experiencing as challenges. So I encourage you to join the forum. Next slide is just, you know, how to get to us if you want to register for anything, if you want to join the forum, and if you want to, actually, Emily just put that link out to get all the free tools and templates you guys want to get. So the last question was, it was more of a conversation going on there about the pipeline, because people have had mixed results with a suggestion box, right? That sometimes those get kind of abandoned and don't get a good name. People don't pay attention to what's in there. But Derek had something called, let's see, what was the name? It's a dig event, a dynamic idea generator where they have a brainstorming session and people share what frustrates them. And they do it quarterly or biannually. And then they follow it up with leadership feedback.
Fantastic. That's good.
Yeah. Other ideas from you on filling that pipeline. You just had a great one, which is you're in the middle of a project, you're going to find other projects inside of it, right?
Exactly. You have the whole host of other things we want to do. And what you want to make sure is you capture those, you feed them into that pipeline, and you don't let those tangents take you off the focus of your current project, the scope of your current project, which has a tendency to slow that project down. And with the best of intentions, we can cause ourselves some problems that way. I like that dig event. That's really what you're talking about here, is formalizing that idea generation. Suggestion boxes are great, but the problem is context, you know, and if you don't keep up with them, they get a bad rap. You get these ideas that may be great ideas, but if you don't have that conversation with the originator, you lose so much context. So you think of ways to kind of get people together to share those suggestions and work them through to turn them into projects. Yeah.
Wonderful. And you've got a lot of folks saying wonderful insights and excellent session. Thanks from Manoj and Khalil and Lee yeah, so and Walter. Thank you guys. And thank you, Ken. This was incredibly enlightening, really helpful. And everybody, the slides will be available soon. The team just has to put a few finishing touches on the recording, and then they'll post it for you. So those will go to everybody who registered for this session. And thanks again. Thank you, Ken. Take care.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your engagement.